Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, a weird RPG, a forgotten sequel, and glorious FMV. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is April 21st, 1993. Before we begin, it was 1 year ago that we began this show. Now in the 90s has turned 1 year old, and it means so much to us that you've watched the show for so long already. I also wanted to give a special shout out to every single person who has supported us over on Patreon. Patrons can get early access to episodes ad-free, see the upcoming release schedule, and let us know which games they want to see covered. There's also a tier that gets those patrons' names shouted out at the end of each episode. If you're also in the position to help support the show, please check out the Patreon link in the description below. We really couldn't have done this without any of you, so behalf on myself, David, and Dylan, thank you so much for letting us make this show that we love doing for this long. Thank you. An RPG game that you probably didn't realize was an RPG got a sequel. Released this week in 1993 was Casino Kid 2 for the NES. Casino Kid 2 is a casino gambling game. Play as the Casino Kid, who must now travel the world in order to defeat the best gamblers across several nations in a variety of casino games, like blackjack and roulette. Keep winning money and defeat all the rivals to become the king of the casino. Casino Kid 2 was developed by Soulful, who also developed the first Casino Kid and Wall Street Kid. For a sequel, there are some key differences. The story of the game was expanded, with the Casino Kid now having to defeat several menacing gambling masters from all over the world, each specializing in a different game. Roulette is a new addition to the available casino games, with the old standbys of blackjack and poker. Now, in the 90s, Texas Hold'em was basically unheard of. It did not become the way of playing poker until about the mid-2000s. In the 90s, it was all about the 5-card draw, which you play in Casino Kid 2. Removed from the first game, however, are a lot of the original's RPG elements. Before, you could walk around the casino floor like it was a dungeon in Dragon Quest, talk to numerous NPCs, and let their personalities and facial expressions carry a lot of the quirky fun of the game. Even though it now has roulette for more gameplay variety, Casino Kid 2 is really a more stripped-down version of the original Casino Kid. More interestingly, despite also being developed by Japanese developer Soulful, Casino Kid 2 was only ever released in North America. It was hardly a major release. It seems more likely that Nintendo of America held on to the game to release it during a dry spell for the NES. They gave a 4-page preview of Casino Kid 2 in the August 1992 issue of Nintendo Power, where the game was practically complete. Hilariously, it tells you less about the game and more teaches kids how to properly gamble. That very same issue of Nintendo Power also reviewed Casino Kid 2 months before it actually released. They graded it with an average score of a 3.2 out of 5. While we're on games that we didn't expect to get a sequel, so did another NES classic. Released in April 1993 was Blaster Master 2 for the Sega Genesis. Blaster Master 2 takes place 4 years after the original. Aliens are invading the Earth, and it's once again up to Jason and his tank named Sophia to stop them. Use the tank to shoot everything, jump and explore a variety of levels. Just like the original, you could hop out of the tank and explore on foot, only this time the side levels are completely 2D side-scrollers. There's also new top-down levels featuring the tank. Fight bosses, find new power-ups, and defeat the aliens digging their way to the Earth's core. Blaster Master 2 was published by Sunsoft, same as the original, but this time the developer is Software Creations, who we recently talked about with their other latest release, Equinox for the SNES. Sunsoft contacted them to develop it because they wanted Blaster Master 2 made specifically with the North American market in mind, after how successful the first one was there. Weirdly, it did jump from the NES to the Sega Genesis, but this may not have always been the case. In the March 1992 issue of Nintendo Power, they reported that Blaster Master 2 was on its way for the Super Nintendo. Just a few months later, at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show, Nintendo Power then reported in their August 1992 issue that Blaster Master 2 is coming for the SNES, but it won't be done until 1993. It's now 1993, and it's done for the Sega Genesis. No idea when this switch in development happened, but it may not have helped the game too much. When it released, reviews for the game were a bit mixed. Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed it with an average score of a 7 out of 10, pointing out the weak sound and also confusion at being able to jump 40 feet but die if you fall 50 feet. On the other hand, GamePro magazine was excruciatingly positive per usual. These days, no one really likes Blaster Master 2 that much. It's seen as a forgotten sequel, and for good reason, and underperformed so much that the Blaster Master series would not resurface again until the year 2000. That said, the current running Blaster Master Zero series, those games rule. Go check them out. Sega got some other notable releases. Also out in April of 1993 was Time Gal for the Sega CD. Time Gal is a cinematic interactive movie game. The Time Gal, Rota, travels through a bunch of periods of time, and it's up to you to help make sure she survives. Watch as scenes play out before you with a quick flash letting you know when you need to press the correct button prompt to prevent death. There's also a few time stop moments where it pauses and you can make a quick decision on how Time Gal can get out of her sticky situation. Time Gal is basically a copycat of Dragon's Lair, only as an anime and a bikini-clad protagonist. It was originally released for Japanese arcades in 1985. The original arcade version of Time Gal was a fully animated game that used the same Laserdisc technology that powered Dragon's Lair. For the Sega CD version, all of that FMV wouldn't quite work or look as good on it, with a lot of compression needed and having less colors available. So instead, the Sega CD uses a mix of the animation from the original game and all new sprites that are essentially rotoscoped and drawn over the original animation to help display and run smoothly. Some other things were also adjusted for the North American release. English voice acting is given to Reika, a new intro cinematic not found in the arcade at all, a new end credits sequence, and some of the failure animations subtly adjusted for minor censorship reasons. Time Gal didn't exactly light up arcades during its original release, as even by then the technology was already seen as becoming obsolete and gamers tired of these FMV QuickTime event style games. However, it was Western coverage of Time Gal that collected enough of an interest and direct requests that the Sega CD version would be made, with development being handled by the company called Wolf Team. They may not sound immediately familiar, but this is the same development team that is now a part of the Namco Tales studio, and they're the very same ones who created the Tales of series. When it finally came out, reviews for Time Gal were still generally positive. Electronic Gaming Monthly loved its animation, its music, and called it one of the best CD games out there, but also noted the simplistic gameplay. Whereas GamePro magazine gave it typical high remarks all around. However, the only English Western release of Time Gal is the one on Sega CD. It did show up on Laserdisc, PlayStation, and Sega Saturn, and now on iPhones, but still only in Japan. There would never be a Time Gal 2. But because the original arcade game was made by Taito in the 2011 Elevator Action Deluxe remake of the original Elevator Action game, Reiko the Time Gal is a free playable DLC character. Plenty of other games released this week, and coming at you with them is Editor Dylan.
Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure is a competent platformer on the Genesis. The momentum and level layouts are dead giveaways that they were heavily influenced by Sonic the Hedgehog. I wonder what a sequel would look like if they had time to refine and innovate further. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long before Tiny Toon Adventures 2 Trouble in Wacky Land for the NES. That was fast. Wait, why is it on the NES? Is it a downgraded version of the last game? Surprisingly, no. In fact, I think it's better. It's a lot more varied in gameplay with a great theme park setting, such as a roller coaster where you hold on for dear life, bumper cars where you try to make Kitty go down the hole. Then you play as Kitty after he's flushed down said hole. I'm really glad they kept things fresh and didn't just make a generic platformer with licensed cartoon characters. Kinda like Tom and Jerry on the SNES, it gets old pretty quick as you just jump around aimlessly collecting cheese bits. Rinse and repeat for a dozen more levels or until you get bored. Speaking of things I'm tired of playing, Terminator Not 2 released yet again, but this time on the SNES. Just look up our March 10th, 1993 episode where we cover the superior Sega CD version of the game. Our final SNES game this week is...
Hey, punk.
Hi. Rude, but it's a fighting game that...
Are you tough enough?
Is that how they spelled it in the 90s? Anyway, it's a 2D fighter
Master the moves to master me.
How long is this title? Are you finished? Can I talk about the game now?
Made by Jalico.
It. You know what? I'll change the title. Hey dickhead, are you an id-e-ut? Then waste your money on this garbage Street Fighter knockoff. Moving on. The Game Boy released a wrestling game called Ring Rage, which sounds like something I had to take my cat to the vet for. But at least it's not spelled like Ring Rage. Graphically and musically, it's actually quite impressive for the handheld, but the gameplay and characters left a lot to be desired. Granted, I've never played its arcade counterpart, so I don't know how faithful this port is. The other Game Boy released this week was Ninja Boy 2. We recently covered the Super Nintendo entry of the franchise, and similar to that game, it offers multiplayer with beat-em-up style random battles and turn-based RPG bosses. If I had this on a road trip as a kid, it would have been awesome playing with my brother in the back seat, but as a single-player experience, it gets way too repetitive and grindy right away. No, I am not going to acknowledge the stupid price for a piece of cardboard and some paper. The last game released this week was Bastille for the TurboGrafx CD. It's a hex-based tactical RPG with an over-the-top, action-packed intro cutscene. I'm just kidding, it's actually really long and boring. After the longest 10 minutes of my life, you begin strategizing your approach on the board. And I gotta say, the music really sets the tone for the game with a very bleak, orchestral, somber tune, really evoking the true horrors of this war. Or it's a very relaxed, jazzy elevator song. That works too. Something that sets it apart from similar tactical RPGs are the enemy encounters. Normally, you would just see an animation play out and whatever happens, happens. But Bastille puts you into a top-down shooter, meaning you could potentially take down powerful opponents with low-level soldiers if you're skilled enough. I am not skilled enough. I got destroyed. But it's alright because after I lose, I come back to this music. And it really just makes everything better. 11 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1993. Q&A time. Why don't we cover PC or arcade games? Time. And lack of credible sources. Console gaming is such a massive topic with too many releases as it is. So apologies in advance if you were excited for us to cover, let's say the Twilight Zone pinball table, for example. We're not going to mention that it came out this week. And we're not going to mention that it introduced MagnaFlip, which was the first table to use magnetic flippers. And we definitely won't be talking about the buy-in system where players have the option to buy an extra ball. So if you wanted us to say all that, I'm sorry, we're just not going to. This game came out earlier and you missed it. Not a question, but we get that a lot. 90% of the time, that was the Japanese release date. Even then, we should assume all North American release dates are approximate, unless there's specific evidence to back up that exact date. Like, for some reason, the Neo Geo games, they're all backed up to the date. What do I look like? If you really want to see, too bad, I'm out of time.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Casino Kid 2 released so late in the NES lifespan, it's now an obscure rarity. Just the game card alone is currently worth $145. With the box and manual, it shoots up to $240. Blaster Master 2 isn't exactly sought after. It had a suggested retail price of $49.99, and now just the game cartridge is $25, though a complete one is still $60. Time Gal, meanwhile, has done alright for itself. It originally released costing $49.99. If you have the disc, it's worth $40. With the cardboard box and manual, it's worth $130. And that's it for today. Next week, one of the earliest games from a now legendary developer, one of the tiniest racing games imaginable, and danger lurks behind you. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some new patrons this week like Brian, Kid Nicky, and Aaron Amen. Please like the video and leave a comment down below and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. All right, be honest. As a kid, one of my actual favorite NES games was Blaster Master. And then when I saw that Blaster Master 2 was on the Sega Genesis, it was the first time in my child life that I had experienced console betrayal. How could they do that to me specifically?